Hi, and welcome to this latest immigration law update video. In this video, I wanted to look at some of the new Home Office policy notes on Afghanistan following the Taliban's takeover of Afghanistan. So on the website, Afghanistan Country Policy and Information Notes, the Home Office in October of this year published 4 new policy documents, one dealing with unaccompanied children. And then probably the 2 main ones of interest are the one on security and humanitarian situation, then one on fear of the Taliban, and then finally one on medical and healthcare provision. So let's have a quick look at them. I haven't gone through them in detail. I've just looked at the summary largely. So do check through the documents as a whole. Remember to look at the references, check the footnotes and what the Home Office have been looking at. And also, because the situation is so fluid, if you're preparing, say, an appeal or an asylum claim or fresh representations in an Afghan case, do have a look for new and updated information on news websites or on the RefWorld website or the very helpful EIN website. So the first one is Unaccompanied Children. This is version 3 from October 2021. I'll put all the links in the notes to this video. And what I'm going to do in looking at all of these documents is largely look at section 2, which is the summary where the Home Office give their sort of policy on the main issues arising. So let's just scroll down to that. So in terms of children, there's a section on credibility, there's a section on exclusion from the convention. Then there's the case law on children forming a social group. And obviously a big issue over the years in terms of children from Afghanistan has been the family tracing issue. Then there's a section now on risk, firstly on the basis of being a child. Again, they run through all of the case law. And then there's a section on the general risk, and this now addresses the position post the Taliban takeover. So it says, in addition 2.5.10 to the general risk resulting from insecurity in the humanitarian situation, children may face human rights violations, including physical abuse, sexual abuse, trafficking, forced labor, and disruption to education, particularly for girls who may be prevented from attending school under Taliban rule. And this is significant about COVID. The COVID pandemic has exacerbated some risks, with child marriage and child labor on the rise as families look for solutions to the disruption of income caused by the pandemic. And there's also an issue about discrimination and stigma faced by children with disabilities. There's a section on 2.5.11 on boys who may be at risk of forced dancing and sexual exploitation, the so-called bacha-bazi. Have a look at that. And again, then there is a section on forced recruitment to the Taliban and risks faced by young boys, particularly of forced recruitment to joining the Taliban, and each case must be looked at the Home Office position on their own facts, but have a look at that. In terms of protection, obviously 2.6.1, if your fear is from the Taliban, they're not going to be able to offer you protection. And they say if you fear another actor, it's too soon to determine whether the Taliban would be able or willing to offer protection. Internal relocation is unlikely. So it says it is unlikely there would be a safe place, that they would not be at risk from the Taliban, and they are unlikely to be able to relocate to escape that risk. That's where there is a fear from the Taliban. And of course, there is a section on return and reception arrangements and the granting of leave as an unaccompanied minor. After that, then in section 3 and following, there is the substantive citations from the country information. So do go through that if you're dealing with a case from a child. Let's look at the next one then. That's the security and humanitarian situation. So in all your Afghan cases, this is going to be a key policy document. We're on version 8 now as of October 2021. And I'm recording this at the end of October 2021. So again, let's scroll down to section 2, the usual credibility, exclusion, convention, reason. Then there's a risk on the humanitarian situation, and there's a review of the country information. And 2.4.4 is significant. It says around half of the population is in need of some sort of humanitarian aid, and gaps and delays in assistance following the Taliban takeover on 15th August 2021 is likely to lead to a further deterioration of the humanitarian situation. Almost 1/3 of the population are in crisis or emergency levels of food insecurity, and food prices are increasing. 80% of the population is facing severe or serious drought, causing water shortages, affecting the ability to maintain crops and livestock. 2.4.5, following the Taliban takeover of Kabul and the subsequent deterioration in the humanitarian and economic situation, as well as the lack of clarity on how the country will be governed in regard to maintaining and delivering public services, decision makers must consider on the facts of the case whether a returnee, by reason of their individual circumstances or vulnerability, faces serious harm or a breach of Article 3. Then there's a section on the security situation. And again, they review the current country the current country guidance cases from the upper tribunal. Again, there's statistics on civilian casualties from January to June 2021, so pre the Taliban takeover, 2.4.15. They question, interestingly, at 2.4.17, whether there is now a situation of internal armed conflict in Afghanistan. And they say in any event that the situation and the violence is not at such a level that everybody would be at risk. But 2.4.18, the decision makers must consider whether individuals would be at risk. And there's the sliding scale approach because of people's particular circumstances. In terms of protection, unlikely to be able to provide protection since the authorities are now the Taliban. It's open to question whether or they'd be able or willing to offer protection, but it will depend on the circumstances of the case. And then in terms of internal relocation, it says internal relocation to Kabul is unlikely to be a reasonable option while the Taliban remain in control, and it would therefore be unduly harsh to expect a person to do so. And then again, section 3 is the main bulk of the country information. Then in terms of specific fear of the Taliban, there's a new version 1, October 2021, there's a new policy note done. So if you've got a specific fear of the Taliban, again, let's scroll down to section 2, which looks, again, there's the usual sections. Then 2.4, there's the section on risk. 2.4.2, Taliban is highly conservative political, religious, and non-democratic movement. Talks about them in their interpretation of Sharia between 1996 and 2001, when they were previously in control. Since entering the Kabul, the Taliban have indicated their intention to implement Sharia across the country, albeit with greater respect for women's and human rights. But it's difficult to assess their claims of being more tolerant and inclusive. And 2.4.4, while there's some indication of a more pragmatic approach, the Taliban have a core set of values and beliefs that it is highly unlikely they would compromise on. And it does talk about there may be regional variations. So those who are at risk in the past, those perceived with the government and civil society and the international community. And at 2.4.8, there is a long list of people who may also be at risk, such as judges, media, those who've transgressed cultural or religious mores, people who've resisted the Taliban's doctrine, healthcare workers, and LGBTIQ+ persons. And they say there is now reason to depart from the 2020 country guidance case of AS safety in Kabul because of the change in circumstances. However, the Home Office position is still each case must be considered on its own facts. Obviously a fluid situation, 2.4.10, but there is a list 2.4.11 of those who are likely to be at risk, but this is a non-exhaustive list. So former government employees and members of the Afghan National Armed Forces, including the police, former employees or those linked to international forces and organizations, including interpreters, which we know about, women in the public sphere, ethnic and religious minorities, in particular the Hazara, persons who've credibly resisted or perceived to resist the Taliban's requests or control, and those who don't conform to their strict cultural, religious expectations and mores, journalists critical of the Taliban, and LGBTIQ plus persons. And there's a section then on LGBTIQ plus individuals and the review of the position there. In terms of protection, again, you're not going to get protection if you fear the Taliban, and it's unlikely that they're going to be offered protection otherwise. And again, if you fear the Taliban, it'll be generally and unduly harsh to expect you to relocate. And again, there's a review of the case law. Finally, then there is a seep-in on medical treatment and healthcare. This largely reviews the provision of medical treatment prior to the Taliban takeover. So you've got Section 3, the overview of provision pre-Taliban takeover, and there's obviously huge difficulties before the Taliban takeover, and then a Section 3.2 then on the situation post the Taliban takeover. So that's worth having a look at if you've got somebody with health issues or you're putting forward a healthcare claim. There's a section on medical supplies and access to treatment and the cost of healthcare. What I did want to get down to is 4.4, which is mental health. There's a particular problem with mental health services being especially lacking in Afghanistan, and there is a social stigma with those with psychological disabilities in Afghanistan. So 4.4 is the section on that. There's also a section on those with physical disabilities. And of course, importantly, now with the Taliban in power, a section on women's health. So do have a look at that. So those are the current Afghan policy notes. I suspect they will be revised and updated as time goes on. Do have a look at them in detail. Do review the footnotes and do your own research on updated country information on websites, like I say, like RefWorld, EIN, to see what developments there have been when you're making your fresh claims, when you're doing your representations, perhaps an asylum case, or you're drafting your appeal skeleton arguments. So I hope that's helpful. Thank you.